Hi there, and welcome to the Divine Insight Show. Thank you so much for joining me whenever you're doing so. I think I said whenever twice, whenever and wherever you're doing so, whether you're watching from YouTube or listening on my website or through a podcast. I really appreciate your time. And I believe there's no accident that you're here. Something drew you here. Maybe it's the topic or someone shared information about the show to you. And much like I believe each of us is destined to be shown the next step in our growth and advancement, and whatever that looks like for us is exactly perfect for us. I believe that if you were drawn here for whatever reason, there must be something that I'm going to be sharing today that's going to be useful for you. So I hope that you enjoy the show. Today I'm going to talk about the shadow, and really the shadow self, or what we could otherwise describe as aspects of ourself that we might otherwise judge or have criticism of, that we might not like, and how those things are actually our greatest gifts and can in fact make us whole when fully embraced. And I believe my experience with my shadow was primarily in the areas in which I had become most self-destructive in my life. And so I've talked about this on the show before. So if you're interested in looking at other shows, you can go to divineinsight.com, and on the show page, scroll down to the bottom. You can scroll back and look at previous shows. You can also subscribe to this show as a podcast on iTunes or Spotify or several other podcasts out there. You can just search the internet for Divine Insight, frankly, and find it. And as well, I just wanted to announce, if I haven't already done so on air, that every Tuesday at 5:30 Pacific time, from 5:30 until either 5:45 or 6 o'clock p.m., I'm doing a live stream from my Instagram, which is @_Travis Taylor. And I wanted to provide a mechanism where I could provide direct readings and or distance healings of people wherever you are in the world. You can just tune in at that time, and I will basically answer questions that are submitted in the comment section and do live readings. And I wanted to provide a mechanism for people to get some additional insight to the work that I do in spirit. And I think that's a great mechanism to do it. So if you're interested in doing so, just follow me @_Travis Taylor on Instagram, and tune in every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. And I would love to meet you there. And otherwise, today, as I said, I'm talking about the shadow and what I call the dance of the shadow. And I think in a lot of ways, for most of my adult life, until I got sober and realized that there was this aspect of myself that I was denying and hiding from and judging and criticizing that just wasn't working for me. It was, in fact, more of a fight with the shadow, an argument, if you will. And what I have later learned really is how to engage with myself in a way that was more of a dance. Much like the yin and the yang of our lives, we must balance the light with the dark, the sun with the moon, the action with the quiet, the masculine aspect of self with feminine aspect of self, the power and the quiet and the meditative. So I think that when we talk about this, it's very similar to the aspect of self. And one of the things that I think about quite a bit is how often we might see people, particularly those who are, quote, more spiritual, unquote, than others, are those that never seem to be fazed by anything in their lives. They're all love and light and letting go, and they go through experiences, oftentimes, I perceive, not necessarily recognizing the emotion that they might have in reaction to an event, and just sort of pretending as if it never happened. And I think there's a tendency to do that, particularly with our lifestyles that might involve a lot of social media posts, is that we tend to present what we think we are experiencing, or the only aspects of it which we want to get feedback from in a positive way. We're reinforcing it with the number of likes that we might get on a post, and then we take self-empowerment from that, or believe that we are better than we might be actually experiencing life, because we want to project an aspect of self which is all things are good and great. And it's often projected into our spiritual realm of saying, well, if things aren't going well for me, then I must be doing something wrong. Maybe I'm not spiritual enough, or I don't love myself enough. And I want to tell you that from part of this show was really my idea that I had was really, we really have to realize that it's okay not to be okay. And that's part of life. It's okay to feel anger because it's an emotion, much like any other emotion, that is informative, and it is important to express them. The real shame that we might have, or things that when we look back we might regret, are those times when we pushed emotions down or ignored them in ways that impacted our physical body. And I think even myself, when I started to do energy work, this is probably 12 years ago, and I was just so interested in it, and I learned about the chakra systems and health and wellness, and I was really obsessed with the ways in which I thought the universe was really communicating with me, not really necessarily understanding at that time how I was a co-creator in that experience that I was having. And anytime something that I judged as bad happened, I thought, to me, I would then internalize that and think that I must not be doing it right. I must have screwed up somewhere. And so what I realized is that I was turning what I consider now to be an aspect of my shadow, which is the ways in which I am critical of myself, or judgmental, or ways in which I devalue myself with my thoughts, was projected onto my experiences in a way that was essentially adding to the event even more self-judgment than what was actually happening, and that I realized was not healthy for me. And so through awareness and my own self-internalized work did I realize that I was, one, a co-creator with everything that was happening in my life, and I realized that the only way that I can change how it is that my life is presenting to me is through changing how I perceived this present moment, and also how I reacted to this present moment, and also how I acted in my life. And as it relates to the shadow, what I think for me, I realized that there were aspects of myself that needed expression, that were drawn to an addictive pattern in me. In particular, alcoholism, which turned into drug addiction, even casually with methamphetamine and sort of other circuit party drugs in my 20s that didn't really become addictive, but it sort of neurologically fed this aspect of my body that was sort of addicted to adrenaline, which I realized, as somebody who's used methamphetamine recreationally, before I went into treatment back in 2006 and again in 2013, that this addiction pattern that I had showed up for me in a very specific way with alcohol use and drug use, but that it was this underlying aspect of self that I didn't love myself, that was a symptom of. So what I realized is that there were certain thoughts that I was having that I didn't like, certain experiences that I was having that were not acceptable to me. And so my reaction to it was wanting to escape, or wanting to cover, or wanting to mask. And that was one way in which I did that. There are other ways that we do this, through food, through negative pattern thinking, which was something that I experienced. Maybe we watch a lot of movies, or we just have this capacity, or this perceived capacity where we've just hit our limit. Maybe even we hit that limit at an earlier time of the day where just one thing will happen and suddenly we notice ourselves being set off for an entire day. And our reaction to that event in the morning, for example, if I were to spill coffee on myself on my way to work, and what my reaction might be is, oh, the whole day is screwed, or the whole day is just destroyed because of this event. Oh my God, I'm so clumsy. How could I do that? I have a meeting and I'm going to be all embarrassed. It's on my shirt. And those sorts of thoughts might propel me into a state of anxiety or emotional reaction, when it was just an event. It was an accident. And if I treat myself in a more loving way with that event, rather than jump into this argument about why it is that I'm wrong or bad or negative, when I instead think about, how would I treat myself if I loved myself? I might say something like, wow, that sucks. But, people do it. It can happen. It doesn't have to ruin my day. It doesn't even have to ruin the rest of my trip to work. It happens. And if anybody judges me for an accident that happened, then yeah, it might be embarrassing to me, but really it says more about them than it does about me. So that's one way in which I have thought about how it is that I react to situations. And my old pattern, or what I would call my shadow aspect, would take a hypercritical role and add a level of self-judgment to any event that happened, which is part of what I learned I wanted to do differently. So when I call it dancing with the shadow, what I say first is that we must separate ourselves from our thoughts so that we at least know what it is that we're thinking. And this way, when we do something that we might not like, unless we are aware that it is something that is in fact harmful to ourselves, or if someone else doesn't tell us that it's affecting them, because maybe they don't want to hurt our feelings, or a lot of us nowadays, we tend to just ghost people instead of actually having a conversation about how their behavior impacted us, is to say, oh, well, I'll just stop talking to the person and it'll be fine. I don't have to worry about it. And it's really a way that we have disengaged from effective communication, and we're not taking responsibility for the relationship, if in fact we want to continue it. But the point that I want to make with the shadow is that, in particular, I call it a dance because unless I know that it's happening, I could just be constantly bombarded with reactionary events that I'm continuing to engage in throughout an entire day, without actually having a sense that I have any control over my reaction. And what I mean by that is, with social media, with emails, with pressure at work, with the responsibilities of family and friends and activities, everybody is busier than they've ever been in their lives. And there's so much pressure that goes on about succeeding and what that looks like, and working hard, and that hamster wheel of our lives. A lot of us, live under the illusion that we need to work hard in order to deserve wealth, rather than work smart, or that we can generate income without having to actually work hard, which is a belief system. But my point is, life, and in particular, this aspect of our sunnier self, if you will, or the part that we like to see, the part that we enjoy, and then there's this other aspect of self, which are those things about ourselves, maybe our personality, that we want to ignore, or we just ignore, or that we're in denial about, that is part of us too. And unless and until we can, one, identify that there are aspects of ourself that we're hiding from, particularly in addiction, I noticed in my own experience that when I just deny the fact that I have an addictive personality and also have been in active addiction, if I just ignore it and say, well, I'm not actively drinking now, so I'm fine, I can't then have awareness of those times in which that aspect of myself is presenting itself, whether I'm drinking or not. And that if that shows up for you in your life, in particular, the self-destructive pattern, which is really what addiction is a form of, among other things, then we can actually step back and say, well, wow, how is it that I am creating a self-destructive pattern in my life, whether it's through addiction or self-sabotage or self-punishing was something that I experienced a lot, because I was addicted, in fact, to the shame of an experience of my addiction, meaning that there was just as much of a payoff to my ego of punishing myself, and the shame and the guilt and the fear that came up through active use, and the shame of hiding myself from others and being honest with myself really was not healthy for me. And so I had to learn, one, how to be honest with myself that I wasn't okay. And I think so many times we tend to project that we are okay when we're not. You know, we just say, oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine, when we're not. And I think we really want to, if we're not in a situation where we actually want to get into that conversation, obviously saying, hi, how you doing? It's just a pleasantry that doesn't require a response. But with people that we interact with on a regular basis, um, it's helpful to actually be honest and say, you know, I'm really not doing okay right now. I'm noticing that I'm having some anger about a situation that's going on for me personally. If it comes out in our conversations, I just want to say I'm sorry. This just isn't, I'm not feeling great today. And I just want to be honest with you. That sort of thing can actually alleviate a lot of the self-pressure that we put on ourselves to say, okay, well, you're just giving people a heads up. You know, a lot of times if we're not conscious of this, it'll come out in other behavior anyway, and everyone will know that we're upset about something anyway. So the idea is that with people that we trust and have a regular relationship with, then it's okay to be upfront. You don't have to get into the details of something that's personal that you're experiencing. But my experience has always been, when I do that, when I do open up and allow people to see that vulnerability that I might have for something that I am going through, then oftentimes the reaction that people have is not what I expected, which is because my reaction to that within myself is one of judgment, when other people often share much more compassion to me than I did, up until, you know, I learned how to show myself more self-compassion. And in fact, I had a relationship one time with someone who, an intimate relationship, a partnership with someone who was not capable of demonstrating to me any level of compassion that I experienced, and that was very difficult. It was a very difficult relationship for me. Ultimately, later I realized that you know, my self-confidence started to improve later, but I didn't have the self-confidence to really be clear about what it is that I needed. Instead, I shut down and I closed off and I isolated, which became another type of pattern. So the idea behind dancing with the shadow is really that understand that we have many aspects presenting at any given time, and some of them are the sunny, the heart-shaped pillows, and the roses, and the beautiful smells, and other times the car accidents, the tragedy, the drama, or the injury. You know, these things happen, and the best that we can do is acknowledge what we're experiencing and make the most of it to the best of our ability, and to have compassion and understanding with ourselves about how it is that we can engage in the best self-care around how to address whatever it is that we're experiencing. So the dance really is sort of this concept that sort of reinforces that we have the ability to work with our lives and work with ourselves in a loving and compassionate way that allows us to have more independence and also autonomy and neutrality in particular, which is something that if we can go through our lives in a more neutral way, we can then experience things in a less personal way. Meaning, I used to take a lot of things personally. Somebody laughed halfway across the room, I assumed that it had to do with me, that they were laughing at me, even if I didn't know them, even if I didn't have any idea what they were talking about. I just assumed, oh, they must be laughing at me. Now, we can see that that's quite an irrational thought, but it was something that I used to do. And I often, even today, I notice that I might have an assumption that something might go wrong automatically. I might automatically assume that I'm not going to get this new client, or that every workshop that I teach is going to be empty, and that nobody's going to like me, and all of this sort of negative narrative that goes on, which is really an old pattern of not enough, of not feeling enough, of not feeling worthy, and not feeling like I deserved health, wellness, and abundance, which is something that I am still working on. But what I notice instead, I notice that I have that thought, and it might even be my first thought, but then I question that thought and I say, goodness, I'm noticing that I'm having a thought that this class, for example, is going to be empty. Or maybe it is. Maybe I even go into the room and nobody signed up for a class that I'm going to teach. And my old pattern of feeling not enough shows up. And what I notice instead is that I say, well, okay, the best that I can do is to open myself up to opportunities and learn how to do maybe a better job of marketing or a better job of creating, opportunities for more people to come to me. So that's part of why I do the radio show and did the radio show for 4 years. It's why I continue to record podcasts and shows, because I want to be able to provide an avenue for people who maybe don't know me or don't know my work or don't know the capacities that I have to help them heal aspects of their lives or the modalities that I use. I want to continue to provide opportunities and information about who I am, because what I've known in my life and what I've realized is that the more I am honest, open, and communicative about the vulnerabilities that I have, particularly as what we can describe as like wounded healer. It's an archetype. Most healers that I know didn't wake up and were born and had no pain in their lives, no experiences, no trauma, and they just were the best healers in the world merely because they were just born into a healer role. No, most of the people that I know had experiences that allowed them to become more open. So for example, people that say, that broke my heart, what I like to say is, well, it broke my heart open. It allowed us to feel and grow and learn. And so when I come back to this topic of the shadow, I like to think about that I have, several aspects of myself going on simultaneously. I have a mental body. I have a physical body. These bodies are communicating with each other all the time. And every ego thought that I have, and I like to say the ego, that aspect of our personality, which exists, is sort of drenched in fear. And a lot of times the ego thoughts that we have are really that judgmental, roommate in the head we can't evict. It's just there. And so the dance of the shadow is also the dance of the ego, how it is that I relate to myself. And can I do so in a way that's smoother and more fun, more flowing, and not arguing with myself or fighting with myself. And when I noticed those aspects, I feel a lot better most of the time. There were days that I used to feel completely stressed out, anxious, couldn't wait to get home, open a bottle of anything, mostly wine. And then when I would get drunk, then all bets are off. And I did that pattern for a very long time. And I thought I wasn't affecting anybody because I was doing it to myself, which is one of the thoughts that I had. And yet now I know that there are ways in which at some point my psyche or my belief around what I can cope with and what I'm capable of is just, it hits its max, and I'm just like, maybe I'm stuck in traffic and I'm late, and all of a sudden this wave of anxiety comes up from my stomach, and I just feel like, oh my God, I can't handle this. I think to myself, that's okay. I can handle this. I am able to handle this. I'm noticing that I'm having a reaction of anxiety, which is something that makes me uncomfortable. And so I'm going to choose to realize that I cannot control how much longer it takes me to get anywhere that I'm going, and adding anxiety to it isn't going to make me feel any better. So why don't I just take a deep breath, become mindful in the moment, do my best to smile, tell whoever it is that's waiting for me that I'm behind, I'm on my way, and just accept that that's what it is, and not self-judge or self-criticize or self-sabotage even further by telling myself that I'm less than in that situation. I'm not good enough. Oh, I suck. Can't I plan how to get myself anywhere? I've actually noticed that a lot in LA. because in Seattle you could put in the amount of time it takes to get to a location, and you pretty much knew it was reliable. It would take 26 minutes to go from A to B. Well, since I've moved to LA, I've realized that you can't rely on MapQuest or your Google Maps or the iPhone app, because you could leave the house and then 20 minutes into the ride, you'll notice that the time in fact increases, not decreases. And so I've realized, wow, that's not super helpful. So what time do I need to leave in order to get to where I'm going? I have to rely on something other than that app, because several times I've noticed that that's happened. And so all I could do in that situation was, hey, I'm really sorry, I misjudged the time that it would take to get there. Take responsibility, apologize, and move on. Let it go and enjoy the ride. That's the best that we can do. And luckily in LA, people are pretty laid back about that kind of thing. People understand that. So luckily it hasn't been particularly problematic for me, but that's just one example. I want to also mention that there are so many ways in which this shadow self, or otherwise ego self, or aspects of ourself that we don't necessarily like, can actually inform us and also become our best friend. When we notice the things that we don't like, rather than turn away and run away, we instead look ourselves in the face and say, oh, I'm noticing this aspect of me that I used to judge. Now I'm going to notice what it is that I'm experiencing in real time, and notice if my reaction is authentic. Is it true, meaning it's based on a belief system, which is based on actual fact? Is it possible that I could be wrong? There could be something else going on. If somebody cuts me off in traffic, I don't automatically assume that they did it on purpose to piss me off. No matter how my reaction is, I might, with compassion, say, oh gosh, I really don't know what's going on in that car, and it's really none of my business. But they might have delayed me a fraction of a second, maybe 2 or 3 seconds. And isn't it interesting that I'm having a very negative reaction to something that delays my trip where I'm going by a fraction of even a minute, and I'm having all of this reaction? Maybe I don't want to do that anymore. Maybe I want to just say, hey, it's not their fault I'm late if I'm late, but maybe I don't like the way they did that. But haven't I also missed a turn or not gotten behind someone in line and needed to cut in later? And wasn't I grateful when I was able to do that? Yeah, there are certain people who are mean and who are cutting in, and none of us like that. But I don't make that assumption anymore about who they are, what they're about, what's going on in that car, because I don't think it's helpful for me. Because it's really my responsibility to live in this world, in my world. And if I make assumptions that aren't giving somebody the benefit of the doubt, then that doesn't really benefit me either, because I might feel like I'm a victim. And these archetypes around being a victim to life versus a co-creator of life might have been my experience or my perceived experience. But I honestly, when I go back to all of the experiences that I have thought were happened to me, I've realized that they have encouraged an amount of growth and compassion and self-love that would never be possible had they not happened in the first place. And I think that can happen with anyone, and that in fact is very much a reason why this sort of conversation around the shadow and the dance of self, if you will, is happening, and why I think it's important to talk about it. And so, what I would like to encourage you to do is to take a piece of paper right now and do sort of a daily review. And you can do this at night. And think about yourself and think about how your day went. And to write down from morning until that evening, what events occurred that you had a less than optimal, a less than ideal reaction to. And I'm very specific about my language around that. Another way of putting it, if you feel like you're a victim, or if you have this victim mentality, you could say, what things happened to me that I didn't like? How did, but I think the more accurate way of reflecting on it is, what events occurred in my day, and what reaction did I have that I didn't like? Or you could say, are there things that I did in this day, in my day, that affected somebody else negatively? One, it's very obvious if somebody told you that. If not, then you could sort of do it your own review. And I think when you do that, you can just say, what were these events? And maybe there's 5, maybe there's 7, maybe there's none. But in this way, it's a way to, with sort of authentic awareness, do an evaluation of our day to say, okay, what happened that I didn't like, that didn't feel good? Obviously, there are major traumas that occur, notices of divorce, deaths, the dog took a dump on the bed, some kind of like unfortunate things where you're like, oh, well, that was just not good. But if there are things that you did, then what you can do then is to basically say, okay, I had an experience that I didn't enjoy. What was my reaction to it? Could I have reacted in a way that was different? What was my belief system around that event that made me react the way that I did? And so this can be really helpful. It's a really helpful way of identifying the belief systems that you have and sort of challenging the narrative around their accuracy, because a lot of times we're running on autopilot, and our autopilot autonomic response to events is the unconscious narrative based on our belief systems, which are often based on events that have occurred, that we create a narrative of not good enough, not deserving love. And when we have this assessment of ourselves on a daily basis or weekly basis or something, you can actually, with pretty clear intent and awareness, do a bit of review to determine what it is that's coming up for you in your life. Are there patterns that you start to see over time? And if you do this on a more regular basis, you'll start to notice the ways in which you approach life. You'll start to notice that there might be ways in which you tend to react to certain situations, and those situations may not be ideal, but maybe there's a way that you could react that would make you feel better, regardless of what other people are telling you. And I think that can be really important, and it can be really helpful. So I think the other aspect I just want to invite you to do, each day, I like to provide tools, daily tools for transformational living, I like to say. So when it comes to this topic of today, which is dancing with the shadow, is to realize that we are many things. We are not one thing. And we want to acknowledge aspects of ourself that we might not like, and it's okay to do that. But we also want to hold that aspect of ourselves in love and compassion, because when we hate, when we are aggressive with ourselves, when we fight or argue with ourselves, we're adding a lower vibrational frequency to that self, and it tends to spiral down. So a good exercise to do as well is to go to a mirror right now, hold a mirror, look in your rearview mirror, look into your eyes and tell yourself, I love you. I love you. I love you. And see what thoughts come up. Often those thoughts are those very things in which we do not love about ourselves. Oh, I'm too hairy. I'm fat. I'm ugly. I don't like this pimple on my forehead, or something about our physical body. And I think once we realize that that's our automatic thought, we can say, oh, well, I don't want to have that thought. I don't want to tell myself I'm fat. I am where I am right now. And so if there is something that I want to change, the only way that I can do that is to have awareness that there's something going on that I don't like. And the only way to do that is through intent and creating space and time to do that. So thank you so much for your time this week. Feel free to send me an email, travis@divineinsight.com, if you have any questions. You can also go to my sessions page on my website, divineinsight.com, and you can look at the different modalities of healing that I do. I do distance healings and readings, and also mentoring and coaching and anything like that. So if there's anything of interest that you find on the modalities page, if you go to the sessions page, you'll scroll down, you can see the different modalities that I use. And you can learn more about that. You can send me an email if you have any questions. Please tune in Tuesdays at 5:30 p.m. Pacific on my Instagram, which is @_Travis Taylor, for live free readings, distance readings, and all of that. And thank you for your time wherever and whenever you are tuning in, and have a wonderful week. You've been watching or listening to the Divine Insight Show.